Picture this. You're standing in a dimly lit room, the air thick with silence, a single flickering bulb casting jagged shadows across the walls. In front of you is a mirror, its surface smudged and cracked, reflecting a face you barely recognize. You stare into your own eyes, searching for something, relief perhaps, or a glimmer of peace. But all you find is a stranger staring back, heavy with a guilt you can't name. You try to turn away, but your feet won't move. Your hands tremble as you reach for the glass, not to touch it, but to shatter it, to break free from this relentless gaze. And yet, you don't. You can't. Because deep down, you know the mirror isn't the problem. It's you. What is it about that reflection that traps you? Here's the paradox. You crave forgiveness, a release from the weight of your mistakes. Yet the one person who can grant it, you, refuses to let go. You forgive others easily enough, a friend's betrayal, a stranger's harsh words. But when it comes to yourself, the gavel falls harder. The sentence is eternal. Why is that? Why do you hold yourself to a standard so unforgiving that even the thought of mercy feels like a betrayal of justice? Is it pride, fear, or something darker, something buried so deep you don't dare name it? Think about the last time you messed up, really messed up. Maybe you hurt someone you love, said words you can't take back, or failed at something you swore you'd conquer. The memory stings, doesn't it? It's not just the act that haunts you, it's the voice that follows, the one that whispers, "You should have known better. You're not good enough. You'll never change." That voice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's a quiet blade, cutting deeper with every replay, carving a canyon between who you are and who you think you should be. And here's the question that gnaws at you. Can you silence it? Can you look at that broken reflection and say, "I forgive you," without flinching? Fyodor Dostoevsky knew this struggle well. In The Brothers Karamazov, he paints a world where guilt isn't just a feeling, it's a prison. Even Karamazov wrestles with his intellect, Alyosha with his faith, and Dmitri with his passions. But they all circle the same abyss, the inability to absolve themselves. Dostoevsky doesn't offer easy answers. He forces you to sit with the tension, to feel the weight. What if forgiveness isn't a gift you give yourself, but a battle you have to fight? What if the enemy isn't the mistake, but the part of you that refuses to let it go? You're trapped in this room, the mirror looming, and the longer you stand here, the more you wonder, is this weight yours to carry forever? Let's step deeper into that room. The shadows shift, stretching across the floor, like fingers reaching for you. You try to focus on the mirror, but your gaze keeps slipping to the edges, where the light doesn't reach. There's something there, something you've always known but never faced. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden part of your psyche, the repository of everything you've denied, repressed, or feared about yourself. That guilt you feel, it's not just about what you did, it's about what you are. The shadow doesn't care about your intentions. It thrives on your shame, feeding it back to you in whispers and nightmares. Here's the contradiction. You think forgiving yourself means erasing the past, wiping the slate clean, but the shadow knows better. It knows every flaw you've hidden, every selfish impulse you've buried, every moment you've chosen comfort over courage. When you lashed out at someone you love, the shadow was there, grinning. When you let fear stop you from chasing a dream, it nodded in approval. And now, as you stand before this mirror, it's the shadow you see, not the mistake, but the part of you that made it. Jung would say that forgiving yourself isn't about pretending those moments never happened. It's about facing the shadow, dragging it into the light, and making peace with it. But can you? Can you look at that dark silhouette and say, "You're mine," without recoiling? Or does the very thought tighten the chains around your chest? Let's push further. Why does this feel so impossible? Your brain has something to say about it. Neuroscience tells us that guilt isn't just an emotion, it's a mechanism. When you mess up, your interior cingulate cortex lights up, screaming, "Danger! Fix this!" It's the same part of your brain that flares when you burn your hand or hear a loud noise, a survival instinct gone rogue. Then comes the amygdala, pumping cortisol through your veins, turning guilt into a physical ache, a fight-or-flight response to a threat that's already passed. And here's the kicker. Every time you replay that mistake, every time you judge yourself, your brain releases a tiny hit of dopamine. Yes, dopamine, the reward chemical. Punishing yourself feels good in a twisted way because it gives you a sense of control, a way to say, see, I'm not letting myself off the hook. It's a cycle. Guilt triggers shame, shame triggers self-punishment, and self-punishment locks the guilt in place. You're not just trapped by your shadow, you're trapped by your own wiring. How do you break free when your brain is conspiring against you? Let's add another layer. Friedrich Nietzsche steps into the room, his voice sharp and unyielding. In Beyond Good and Evil, he argues that our obsession with guilt and forgiveness is a human construct, a moral trap we've built to keep ourselves in line. There is no such thing as moral phenomena, he writes, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. That guilt you feel, it's not a universal truth. It's a story you've told yourself, a judgment you've passed on your own existence. Nietzsche would say you're not struggling to forgive yourself. You're struggling to escape the cage of good and evil, to stop seeing every mistake as a mark against your soul. But here's the paradox he leaves you with. If you reject that cage, if you declare yourself beyond guilt, what's left? Are you free or are you just alone, staring into a void where forgiveness doesn't even matter? The room grows colder, the shadows darker, and you're still standing there, the mirror unyielding. Let's take this to the streets now. Imagine you're walking through a crowded city, faces blurring past you. People laughing, arguing, rushing to nowhere. You see a man yelling at his child and you think, what a terrible parent. You see a woman in a flashy coat and you mutter, she's so shallow. Judgment flows like breath, automatic and effortless. But then you turn it inward and it's a different beast. You don't just judge your actions, you judge your worth, your essence, your right to exist. Why is that? Society has something to do with it. From the moment you're born, you're taught to measure yourself against your peers, your parents' expectations, the flawless lives scrolling across your screen. You're conditioned to see failure not as an event, but as an identity. Make a mistake, and you're not just someone who messed up. You're a failure, a disappointment, a fraud. And the world doesn't let you forget it. Social media amplifies the noise. Every post a reminder of what you're not, every like a verdict on what you are. You're caught in a cultural machine that thrives on guilt, a machine that says forgiveness is for others. But for you, there's only the ledger of your flaws. How do you forgive yourself when the world has trained you to be your own executioner? The tension builds. Let's go back to that mistake, the one you can't shake. Maybe it was years ago, a lie that spiraled out of control, or yesterday, a moment of weakness you swore you'd never repeat. You've apologized, maybe even been forgiven by others, but it's still there, a splinter under your skin. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this the burden of freedom. In Being and Nothingness, he argues that you're radically free, free to choose, free to act, free to judge yourself. But that freedom comes with a price. You can't blame fate or circumstance. Every mistake is yours, every guilt self-inflicted. Sartre would say that refusing to forgive yourself is a choice, a way to avoid the terror of starting over, of facing a future where you might fail again. But what if that choice is what's killing you? What if every time you cling to guilt, you're not protecting yourself? You're burying yourself alive. The room feels smaller now, the walls closing in, the mirror's gaze sharper. Let's peel back one more layer. Arthur Schopenhauer joins the conversation, his voice heavy with resignation. He'd say this struggle is inevitable, a product of the will, the blind, insatiable force that drives you to want, to act, to suffer. In The World as Will and Representation, he writes that life is a pendulum swinging between boredom and pain, and guilt is just another swing. You can't forgive yourself because the will won't let you. It thrives on your discontent, your self-loathing, your endless chase for redemption. Schopenhauer doesn't offer hope. He offers truth. You're trapped because you're human, because to live is to err, and to err is to ache. But what if he's wrong? What if this isn't inevitable? What if you could step off the pendulum, even for a moment. The shadows are thicker now, the light flickering faster, and you're still here, facing that cracked reflection. Let's get personal. I've been where you are. A few years back, I hurt someone I cared about. Not with fists, but with words, the kind that cut deeper than you expect. I apologized. They forgave me, but I didn't. I replayed it every night, the scene looping like a broken film. My voice, their face, the silence that followed. I told myself I didn't deserve forgiveness. Not theirs, not mine. It wasn't noble. It was cowardice. Holding on to that guilt felt safer than letting it go, because letting go meant facing myself, all of myself, the parts I liked and the parts I despised. Jung was right. It was my shadow and I was terrified of it. But one day I looked in the mirror, not this cracked one, but a real one, and I said it. I forgive you. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel final. But it felt like a start. The room is suffocating now, the air heavy with questions. Can you do it? Can you forgive yourself? Not just say it, but mean it? Neuroscience says your brain will fight you, dopamine luring you back to punishment, cortisol keeping you on edge. Culture says you don't deserve it. That guilt is your penance, your proof of goodness. Dostoevsky says it's a battle. Jung says it's a confrontation. Nietzsche says it's a cage. Sartre says it's a choice. Schopenhauer says it's your nature. They're all here, crowding the room, their voices overlapping, and you're still standing there, the mirror unyielding. Here's the trap. The harder you try to forgive, the more you realize how deep the guilt runs, how tangled it is with who you are. You're not just forgiving a mistake. You're forgiving a self you've spent years condemning. And that's the urgency. If you don't, this weight will crush you. It's already shaping you. Your relationships, your choices, your dreams, silently eroding what's left of your peace. Society feels it too. We're a world of unforgiven selves, projecting our guilt onto each other, dividing, isolating, breaking. But what if you could? What if you could stand in this room, face the shadow, defy the wiring, reject the conditioning and say, enough? Not because you're perfect, not because you're absolved, but because you're human, flawed, fragile, and still here. The light flickers one last time, the shadows pulse, and the mirror waits. So tell me, can you really forgive yourself? And if you did, what would you see in that reflection tomorrow?